What are we going to do today? We're going to do Part D, column chromatography.
In Part D, we will be using column chromatography to separate fluorine and fluorinone using alumina as an absorbent. We're going to now need to weigh out 1.25 grams of alumina. So here you see we're tearing the balance, putting the weighing dish on, re-tearing it, and then we're going to weigh out our alumina, as you can see we're doing here. And then we're going to take our alumina back to our hood. Once back at the hood, we're going to clamp our column, and then we're going to take the alumina that we just weighed out and pour it into the column. And one thing I want to show you guys is that when you look at the column, the top of the column, the alumina has to be flat across, because that's the starting point where our compounds are going to be put onto the column to be separated. We separate the compounds on the column using solvent, and the solvents we're using today are hexane, acetone, and 70-30 hexane acetone, 30 acetone, 70 hexane, and then the compound we're separating is a mixture of fluorine and fluorinone. Well, the compounds we're going to separate. Now we're going to take, and you can see pouring here, 9 milliliters of hexane, and then you can see we're putting it into our graduated cylinder, measuring out our 9 mils, and then we're going to measure out the 70% hexane, 30% acetone solution, and that we only need 2 mils. We pour it in a beaker and then pour the solvent from the beaker into the graduated cylinder so we don't spill it everywhere. And now we have our 70-30 and our hexane. Hexane goes into the hexane test tube, 9 mils. 2 mils goes into the 70-30, and the acetone we'll get from our hood. We're filling up 2 mils of acetone and now pouring it into our acetone test tube there. And now we have to collect our samples in 4 test tubes labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can see here we're placing the test tubes under the column, so when we put the fluorine and fluorinone onto the column, we can separate them. First, we have to wet our column. We're just adding plain hexane, and all that does is basically wet the column. Once it's wet, we add our fluorine fluorinone mixture. We're pipetting it out, 0.3 mils, and we're putting it onto the column. Once it's on the column, we're going to add more hexane. The hexane will push the compounds down the column, much like TLC does. You can see we're using a syringe to push the solvent through at a faster rate. And you can see here we have to slowly push it. The solvent's going down, and the compounds are moving down the column. And we know the compounds are moving down the column. You can see the yellow band moving down the column. And you can see the solvent dripping into test tube 2. We're finishing the rest of our hexane. It's being poured onto the column here. And we're going to again use our syringe to push the solvent through and move the compounds down the column. Once we have all of the yellow band has moved down the column, we will switch to test tube 3. So as you can see here, the yellow band is basically moved down the column. So now what we're going to have to do is we will switch to test tube 3 once we add our 70-30 hexane acetone solution. Well, here we switch it. We add our 70-30 acetone solution, move to test tube 3, use our syringe to push our 70-30 acetone solvent through the column and to collect our compound. And as you can see, all the yellow came off the compound, off the column, which means it should be in test tube 3. At the end of the day, we want to have separated the two compounds. In test tube 4, we're just cleaning our column. We're running acetone through it to get any last part off of our column. And ultimately, our test tube 2 should contain fluorine, and our test tube 3 should contain fluorinone. So once our compounds are off our column, we have to get the alumina out of the column. We do this by hooking up the syringe to the bottom of the column and pushing air through the column to remove the alumina from the column. In order to see if our column worked, we have to take a TLC of our fractions 2 and 3. So we need to get dichloromethane or methylene chloride, which is our eluting solvent, put it in a beaker, get a TLC plate, which we have gotten here, draw our reference line, label it T1, T2 for test tube 2, T3 for test tube 3, I have 1 and 2 there, and M for mixture. So we spot our test tube 2 on the first spot, test tube 3 on the second spot, and our mixture on the last spot. So we put our TLC plate into our developing chamber, cover it with a watch glass, and let the methylene chloride run up the TLC plate. When it's done, we take it out, draw a line across our solvent front, dry it, and once it's visualized, we can see that test tube 2 did only contain fluorine and test tube 3 only fluorinone. We can now calculate our RF values. Our column chromatography experiment was a success.